guys, welcome to activity 2 of our unit on evolution, which we are going to go through real quickly. This is called hiding in the background, which many of you can probably anticipate that it's going to be about camouflage maybe. For our do now activity 2, and I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. This activity today, you have this video to watch and you will be responsible for a Google document that I have attached to the assignment, and you're going to fill that out and you're going to submit it and turn it in for me to grade that. So thinking about yesterday and what we learned and what we've been doing for the past few days of our unit on evolution, bacteria has a mechanism when they die, when they reproduce, some of their features that they actually can pass on some of their mutations. And because some of you, I noticed, asked a couple of questions about how fast evolution is, and it depends on the life cycle of the organism. For example, bacteria, double divide, double divide, double divide, double divide. They can make hundreds and thousands and millions of copies of themselves. And every time you make a copy, there's an opportunity for a mutation. A mutation can be harmful. A mutation can be helpful. A mutation cannot be significant at all and just do nothing. So with those mutations, harmful mutations would cause the organism that had that harmful mutation to possibly die, not spread and pass on its genes. Helpful mutation, maybe that organism would pass on its DNA. And then a neutral mutation doesn't really change how the organism interacts with the environment, so it might not affect it at all. So bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics, and you had 3 ways, and then I was going to ask you to draw a sketch. That picture is this bacteria has created wings, and so when mutations occur, it changes how that organism, for example, can act with COVID. So some viruses are not airborne, but they can mutate and become that way. So viruses mutate really quickly because they reproduce pretty quickly if they can find a host. And that's why with these coronaviruses, corona is like the family of viruses. And within that family, there's lots and lots of different types of viruses. As far as bacteria goes, this from the video symbolizes reproduction. So during reproduction, the bacteria is double dividing, so this is not really happening. When the DNA doubles and the DNA divides, a mutation can occur. So reproduction is one of the ways a bacteria can mutate. This one I loved. When this bacteria died, it out its DNA. So some bacteria in the environment when it dies, and bacteria have a lifespan as well, pieces of its DNA can go out into the ecosystem, into the extracellular environment, and that bacteria can combine with other bacteria's DNA. That DNA is pretty cool. Conjugation is kind of a neat thing. Paramecium use conjugation. Conjugation is with my pili. I exchange genetic information, and so that can result in mutations. So bacteria and evolution, mutations, pretty cool. As far as other organisms go, it depends on their population. It depends on their reproductive strategy. It depends on how long it takes, for example, for elephants to evolve. It takes a really long time for a mother elephant to grow a baby elephant and for that baby elephant to grow into a reproducing organism. And so those generations, if they're really long, it's going to be challenging to have evolution that goes as fast as, say, bacteria. We're going to do an activity today called hiding in the background. And you can see that this technique of hiding in the background is camouflage. And so you watched last week that video with natural selection about the moths. And when the environment changes, the mutations that help the organism survive in the environment, those really helpful mutations will be passed on to offspring and eventually in the population. So here's a caveat that you'll need when you go to high school. An individual cannot evolve. The word evolution is for the population. An individual can have a mutation, and that mutation can help that individual survive. And if that mutation is passed on to offspring, passed on to offspring, passed on to offspring, the population potentially can change. That is evolution. So with jaguars and fish, the fish that evolved these mutations to hide in their environment survived, had more babies. The babies that didn't survive. And I have a really cool video that it just made me think of that I want to make sure I share with you. So activity 2, hiding in the background. In the last activity, you explored how the presence of antibiotics in the environment affects the survival of bacteria depending on their resistance to antibiotics. In this activity, you will use a model to explore how an environment that includes predators affect the survival of organisms of an imaginary species, toothpick worms. So if we were together, we would have toothpick worms. You will focus on differences in just one feature, the color of the worms. The versions of a feature, such as color, are called traits. Remember this from our reproduction unit. So the trait for this particular worm that we're studying is its color. And the differences in the trait is called the variations. And so for like humans, the trait could be skin color, and the differences could be all the variations in skin color that we have. For these worms, there are 2 possible traits in worms, and their trait for color is green and beige. So our guiding question, how does the environment affect an individual's probability of survival and successful reproduction? So we have a population of worms, and I just screenshotted some worms off the internet here. This population of worms comes in 2 colors, and so it's the same worm species. Obviously, these are not the same species, but imagine that these worm species could come in 2 colors, green and beige. Some worms are lighter, some worms are darker. Birds eat these worms. Most of the birds that eat these worms are better at seeing the lighter worm or beige. So which worms do you think are more likely to be eaten? The ones that are easier to see or the ones that are harder to see? Let's look. So what do you think will happen to the color of the worm population over many generations and why? So here's what you're going to get. You are going to go ahead and open your Google Doc, and your Google Doc is called Evolution Act 2 Data. And in this Act 2 data, you've got 3 generations that we're going to track. And we're going to try, and there's an analysis question at the bottom. We're going to track these generations by watching a short video, and you're going to make sure that you use the video information to fill out your data table, and I'll help you with the first couple of pieces of data, and then I'll let you continue watching, and then we'll come back together.
Activity 2, hiding in the background. Label one of the paper bags worms and the other reserve toothpicks. Each toothpick represents a worm. Count 25 green worms and 25 beige worms and place them into the paper bag labeled worms. This is the initial number of worms in the initial population, also called the first generation. These amounts are already marked for you in both tables on Student Sheet 2.1, Worm Populations. Shake the worms bag to mix the worms. Scatter the worms on the ground. Each person played the role of a bird predator and preyed on worms. The group has to pick up 40 worms, regardless of color, and place them in their own plastic bag, which represents the bird's stomach. Pause the video and count the total numbers of green and beige worms that survived in the habitat.
So I'll pause for you and help you out here. So she's got them spread out, As far as beige goes, 2 survived out of that 25 that were available. And as far as the green, we've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 there. So when you go back to this table here, for green, you'd have 8, and for beige, you'd have 2. The next part of this simulation says, all right, so for step 3, these worms are reproducing in their environment. And when they reproduce, they can actually reproduce and have 4 worms at a time. And so what you'll do is you'll take the numbers from row 2 of the surviving adults. So there's 8 green worms. And if they make 4 each, then there's going to be 32. Babies. That's how many babies there are. And then as far as the beige worms, they're going to have 8 babies. And so the total is I have to add the surviving adults to their babies. So for my green worms, I have a total of 40. And for my beige worms, I have a total of 10. When I go down to do generation 2, I start with 40 and 10. So I'm going to let you finish filling out this data table and watching the video, and then you can do all that information on your own. Make sure you also answer the analysis question down here. Also make sure you finish to the end of the video.
Pause the video and record these totals in row 2 of the table for Generation 1 on Student Sheet 2.1. Pause the video and complete procedure steps 8 to 9 in your student book, which has you complete the calculations in your data table.
So for student sheet 8 for steps 8 and 9, I actually have steps 8 and 9 here, but it's exactly what I said. I can leave this up here for a second though, so that you could read it. For step 8, it's calculating the worms for row 3. And for step 9, it's calculating the worms for row 9. So if you'd like to pause and read through that, you may obviously do that.
It's time for Generation 2. These worms represent the number of green and beige worms that are present in the habitat at the start of Generation 2. Scatter the worms on the ground. Each person played the role of a bird predator and preyed on worms. The group has to pick up 40 worms, regardless of color, and place them in their own plastic bag, which represents the bird's stomach. Pause the video and count the total numbers of green and beige worms that survived in the habitat. Pause the video and record these totals in row 2 of the table for Generation 2 on Student Sheet 2.1. Pause the video and complete procedure steps 8 through 9 in your student book, which has you complete the calculations in your data table for Generation 2.
Once you've completed your calculations for Generation 2, you can do the surviving here and for Generation 3 and talk to me about what you think is going to happen with the analysis question. And I'll change this to Generation 3. All right. Back to our slideshow here. So we made a model. Evolution, often we make models to represent actual phenomenon that are happening, this evolution of hiding in the background, camouflage, and natural selection. So what if a beige worm were dyed green and released again into the environment? Would its chances of survival improve? What about its offspring? Would their chances of survival improve? So go ahead and think about that when we talked about genotypes and phenotypes. So if my genotype is to be a brown worm and I dyed that worm green, or my genotype was to be, my genotype was to be a beige worm and I dyed that worm green, so now my phenotype is green. Do I pass that green gene onto my offspring? No, I don't have a green gene. I have beige genes. I literally just changed my phenotype. So sometimes with evolution, we think about how it's manipulated. A couple of you guys asked, how can humans change evolution? And we do that by artificially selecting. So think about breeds of dogs, think about cows, horses. We choose which organisms to breed based on desirable traits. We do this with greyhound dogs. If the fast dog male gets bred with the fast female, our hope is that the offspring are fast. Now, the offspring that aren't fast wouldn't get an opportunity to breed. They would either castrate those dogs or euthanize those dogs or sell those or give those dogs to an adoption center, something. But that idea that selection can be done by nature and selection can be done by humans. This is an example that you saw and read about or watched about in a video previously, that we had a population of peppered moths, and those peppered moths were peppered because the trees that were growing in the environment were like the peppery white with black. Well, during the Industrial Revolution in England, figured out, burning coal, we can make a lot of heat. We can get some energy. We can transform that chemical energy in the bonds of the coal into thermal energy, into heat, by breaking up those molecules and those bonds. And when we did that, we were super happy to be warm. And one of the unintended consequences was all this black smut. So in this environment, the black smut started covering all of the trees. And lo and behold, some of the peppered moths that were born had a mutation to be all black. Some peppered moths were peppered. Well, what happened when the trees were nice and pristine in their original environment? If I was born black, I was real easy to spot. Bird ate me, I'm gone. I didn't have, maybe I did have a couple of offspring first, but it was really easy to spot, for birds to spot me as prey. What happened after the Industrial Revolution, when we started burning all that coal, is as that coal and that soot covered those trees, all of a sudden it was the peppered moth that became easier to see. And it was the peppered moths that didn't survive as well in the environment. And lo and behold, the population of moths became more black. That is evolution, and it happened right before our eyes, where the population changed. So when you think about that happening naturally as nature changes, or artificially as humans change environments, either intentionally or non intentionally, you can see that evolution and not in this selection of traits, this selection of the variation within traits, is a pretty powerful thing. Please submit your worksheet from the Google Doc with your analysis question completed, and I'll see you soon.